No resistance was offered, made for the statues, and, failing to wrench them from their pedestals, tied ropes to them and began to haul. Then, they say, and some people will perhaps believe them, though I, for my part, do not, the two statues, as they were being dragged and hauled, fell down both upon their knees, in which attitude they still remain. Such, according to them, was the conduct of the Athenians. They, meanwhile, having learnt beforehand what was intended, had prevailed on the Argives to hold themselves in readiness. And the Athenians accordingly were but just landed on their coasts when the Argives came to their aid. Secretly and silently they crossed over from Epidaurus, and before the Athenians were aware, cut off their retreat to their ships and fell upon them. And the thunder came exactly at that moment, and the earthquake with it. The Argives and the Aeginetans both agree in giving this account, and the Athenians themselves acknowledge that but one of their men returned alive to Attica. According to the Argives, he escaped from the battle in which the rest of the Athenian troops were destroyed by them. According to the Athenians, it was the god who destroyed their troops, and even this one man didn't escape, for he perished in the following manner. When he came back to Athens, bringing word of the calamity, the wives of those who had been sent out on the expedition took it sorely to heart that he alone should have survived the slaughter of all the rest. They therefore crowded round the man and struck him with the brooches by which their dresses were fastened, each, as she struck, asking him where he had left her husband. And the man died in this way. The Athenians thought the deed of the women more horrible even than the fate of the troops. As, however, they didn't know how else to punish them, they changed their dress and compelled them to wear the costume of the Ionians. Till this time, the Athenian women had worn a Dorian dress, shaped nearly like that which prevails at Corinth. Henceforth, they were made to wear the linen tunic, which doesn't require brooches. In very truth, however, this dress isn't originally Ionian but Carian, for anciently the Greek women all wore the costume which is now called the Dorian. It said further that the Argives and the Aeginetans made it a custom on this same account for their women to wear brooches half as large again as formerly, and to offer brooches rather than anything else in the temple of these goddesses. They also forbade the bringing of anything Attic into the temple, were it even a jar of earthenware, and made a law that none but native drinking vessels should be used there in time to come. From this early age to my own day, the Argive and Aeginetan women have always continued to wear their brooches larger than formerly, through hatred of the Athenians. Such then was the origin of the feud which existed between the Aeginetans and the Athenians. Hence, when the Thebans made their application for succour, the Aeginetans, calling to mind the matter of images, gladly lent their aid to the Boeotians. They ravaged all the sea-coast of Attica, and the Athenians were about to attack them in return, when they were stopped by the oracle of Delphi, which bade them wait till 30 years had passed from the time that the Aeginetans did the wrong, and in the 31st year, having first set apart a precinct for Iacchus, then to begin the war. So should they succeed to their wish, the oracle said, but if they went to war at once, though they would still conquer the island in the end, yet they must go through much suffering and much exertion before taking it. On receiving this warning, the Athenians set apart a precinct for Iacchus, the same which still remains dedicated to him in their marketplace, but they couldn't hear with any patience of waiting 30 years after they had suffered such grievous wrong at the hands of the Aeginetans. Accordingly, they were making ready to take their revenge when a fresh stir on the part of the Lacedaemonians hindered their projects. These last had become aware of the truth, how that the Alcmeonidae had practised on the Pythoness, and the Pythoness had schemed against themselves and against the Pisistratidae, and the discovery was a double grief to them. For while they had driven their own sworn friends into exile, they found that they hadn't gained thereby a particle of goodwill from Athens. They were also moved by certain prophecies which declared that many dire calamities should befall them at the hands of the Athenians. Of these, in times past, they had been ignorant, but now they had become acquainted with them by means of Cleomenes, who had brought them with him to Sparta, having found them in the Athenian citadel, where they had been left by the Pisotatidae when they were driven from Athens. They were in the temple, and Cleomenes, having discovered them, carried them off. So when the Lacedaemonians obtained possession of the prophecies, and saw that the Athenians were growing in strength, and had no mind to acknowledge any subjection to their control, it occurred to them that if the people of Attica were free, they would be likely to be as powerful as themselves, but if they were oppressed by a tyranny, they would be weak and submissive. Under this feeling they sent and recalled Hippias, the son of Pisistratus, from Sigeum upon the Hellespont, where the Pisotatidae had taken shelter. Hippias came at their bidding, and the Spartans, on his arrival, summoned deputies from all their other allies, and thus addressed the assembly. "Friends and brothers in arms, we are free to confess that we did lately a thing which was not right. Misled by counterfeit oracles, we drove from their country those who were our sworn and true friends, and who had, moreover, engaged to keep Athens' independence upon us. And we delivered the government into the hands of an unthankful people, a people who no sooner got their freedom by our means, and grew in power, than they turned us and our king, with every token of insult, out of their city. Since then they have gone on, continually raising their thoughts higher, as their neighbours of Boeotia and Chalcis have already discovered to their cost, and as others too will presently discover if they shall offend them. Having thus erred, we will endeavour now with your help to remedy the evils we have caused, and to obtain vengeance on the Athenians. For this cause we have sent for Hippias to come here, and have summoned you likewise from your several states, that we may all now with heart and hand unite to restore him to Athens, and thereby give him back that which we took from him formerly." Such was the address of the Spartans. The greater number of the allies listened without being persuaded. None, however, broke silence but Sophocles the Corinthian, who exclaimed, "Surely the heaven will soon be below, and the earth above, and men will henceforth live in the sea, and fish take their place upon the dry land, since you, Lacedaemonians, propose to put down free governments in the cities of Greece, and to set up tyrannies in their room. There is nothing in the whole world so unjust, nothing so bloody as a tyranny. If, however, it seems to you a desirable thing to have the cities under despotic rule, begin by putting a tyrant over yourselves, and then establish despots in the other states. While you continue yourselves, as you have always been, unacquainted with tyranny, and take such excellent care that Sparta may not suffer from it, to act as you are now doing is to treat your allies unworthily. If you knew what tyranny was, as well as ourselves, you would be better advised than you now are in regard to it." The government of Corinth was once an oligarchy, a single race, called Bacchiadae, who intermarried only among themselves, held the management of affairs. Now it happened that Amphion, one of these, had a daughter named Labda, who was lame, and whom therefore none of the Bacchiadae would consent to marry. So she was taken to wife by Aetion, son of Echecrates, a man of the township of Petra, who was, however, by descent of the race of the Lapithae, and of the house of Caneus. Aetion, as he had no child, either by this wife or by any other, went to Delphi to consult the oracle concerning the matter. Scarcely had he entered the temple when the Pythoness saluted him in these words, "No one honours thee now, Aetion, worthy of honour. Labda shall soon be a mother, her offspring a rock that will one day fall on the kingly race and right the city of Corinth." By some chance this address of the oracle to Aetion came to the ears of the Bacchiadae, who till then had been unable to perceive the meaning of another earlier prophecy which likewise bore upon Corinth and pointed to the same event as Aetion's prediction. It was the following: "When mid the rocks an eagle shall bear a carnivorous lion, mighty and fierce, he shall loose the limbs of many beneath them. Brood ye well upon this, all ye Corinthian people, ye who dwell by fair Pyrene and beetling Corinth." The Bacchiadae had possessed this oracle for some time, but they were quite at a loss to know what it meant until they heard the response given to Aetion. Then, however, they at once perceived its meaning, since the two agreed so well together. Nevertheless, though the bearing of the first prophecy was now clear to them, they remained quiet, being minded to put to death the child which Aetion was expecting. As soon, therefore, as his wife was delivered, they sent 10 of their number to the township where Aetion lived, with orders to make away with the baby. So the men came to Petra, and went into Aetion's house, and there asked if they might see the child. And Labda, who knew nothing of their purpose, but thought their inquiries arose from a kindly feeling towards her husband, brought the child, and laid him in the arms of one of them. Now they had agreed by the way that whosoever first got hold of the child should dash it against the ground. It happened, however, by a providential chance, that the babe, just as Labda put him into the man's arms, smiled in his face. The man saw the smile and was touched with pity, so that he couldn't kill it. He therefore passed it on to his neighbor, who gave it to a third, and so it went through all the 10 without any one choosing to be the murderer. The mother received her child back, and the men went out of the house and stood near the door, and there blamed and reproached one another, chiefly, however, accusing the man who had first had the child in his arms, because he had not done as had been agreed upon. At last, after much time had been thus spent, they resolved to go into the house again, and all take part in the murder. But it was fated that evil should come upon Corinth from the progeny of Aetion, and so it chanced that Labda, as she stood near the door, heard all that the men said to one another. And fearful of their changing their mind and returning to destroy her baby, she carried him off, and hid him in what seemed to her the most unlikely place to be suspected, that's to say, a kipsel, or corn bin. She knew that if they came back to look for the child, they would search all her house, and so indeed they did. But not finding the child, after looking everywhere, they thought it best to go away, and declare to those by whom they had been sent that they had done their bidding. And thus they reported on their return home. Aetion's son grew up, and in remembrance of the danger from which he had escaped, was named Kypselus, after the corn bin. When he reached to man's estate, he went to Delphi, and on consulting the oracle received a response which was two-sided. It was the following: "See, there comes to my dwelling a man much favoured of fortune, Kypselus, son of Aetion, and king of the glorious Corinth, he and his children too, but not his children's children." Such was the oracle, and Kypselus put so much faith in it that he forthwith made his attempt, and thereby became master of Corinth. Having thus got the tyranny, he showed himself a harsh ruler. Many of the Corinthians he drove into banishment, many he deprived of their fortunes, and a still greater number of their lives. His reign lasted 30 years, and was prosperous to its close, insomuch that he left the government to Periander, his son. This prince, at the beginning of his reign, was of a milder temper than his father, but after he corresponded by means of messengers with Thrasybulus, tyrant of Miletus, he became even more sanguinary. On one occasion he sent a herald to ask Thrasybulus what mode of government it was safest to set up in order to rule with honour. Thrasybulus led the messenger without the city, and took him into a field of corn, through which he began to walk. while he asked him again and again concerning his coming from Corinth, ever as he went, breaking off and throwing away all such ears of corn as overtopped the rest. In this way he went through the whole field, and destroyed all the best and richest part of the crop. Then without a word he sent the messenger back. On the return of the man to Corinth, Periander was eager to know what Thrasybulus had counselled, but the messenger reported that he had said nothing, and he wondered that Periander had sent him to so strange a man, who seemed to have lost his senses, since he did nothing but destroy his own property. And upon this he told how Thrasybulus had behaved at the interview. Periander, perceiving what the action meant, and knowing that Thrasybulus advised the destruction of all the leading citizens, treated his subjects from this time forward with the very greatest cruelty. Where Cypselus had spared any, and had neither put them to death nor banished them, Periander completed what his father had left unfinished. One day he stripped all the women of Corinth stark naked, for the sake of his own wife Melissa. He had sent messengers into Thesprotia to consult the oracle of the dead upon the Acheron concerning a pledge which had been given into his charge by a stranger, and Melissa appeared, but refused to speak or tell where the pledge was. She was chill, she said, having no clothes. The garments buried with her would of no manner of use, since they had not been burnt. And this should be her token to Periander that what she said was true. The oven was cold when he baked his loaves in it. When this message was brought him, Periander knew the token, for he had lain with Melissa's corpse. Wherefore he straightway made proclamation that all the wives of the Corinthians should go forth to the temple of Hera. So the women apparelled themselves in their bravest and went forth, as if to a festival. Then, with the help of his guards, whom he had placed for the purpose, he stripped them one and all, making no difference between the free women and the slaves, and taking their clothes to a pit, he called on the name of Melissa, and burnt the whole heap. This done, he sent a second time to the oracle, and Melissa's ghost told him where he would find the stranger's pledge. Such, O Lacedaemonians, is tyranny, and such are the deeds which spring from it. We Corinthians marvelled greatly when we first knew of your having sent for Hippias, and now it surprises us still more to hear you speak as you do. We adjure you by the common gods of Greece, plant not despots in her cities. If, however, you are determined, if you persist against all justice in seeking to restore Hippias, know at least that the Corinthians will not approve your conduct. When Sophocles, the deputy from Corinth, had thus spoken, Hippias replied, and invoking the same gods, he said, Of a surety the Corinthians will beyond all others regret the Pisistratidae, when the fated days come for them to be distressed by the Athenians. Hippias spoke thus because he knew the prophecies better than any man living. But the rest of the allies, who till Sophocles spoke had remained quiet, when they heard him utter his thoughts thus boldly, altogether broke silence and declared themselves of the same mind. And withal they conjured the Lacedaemonians not to revolutionize a Grecian city. And in this way the enterprise came to naught. Hippias hereupon withdrew, and Amyntas the Macedonian offered him the city of Anthemus, while the Thessalians were willing to give him Iolcus, but he would accept neither the one nor the other, preferring to go back to Sigeum, which city Pisistratus had taken by force of arms from the Mytileneans. Pisistratus, when he became master of the place, established there as tyrant his own natural son, Hegesistratus, whose mother was an Argive woman. But this prince wasn't allowed to enjoy peaceably what his father had made over to him, for during very many years there had been war between the Athenians of Sigeum and the Mytileneans of the city called Achilleum. They of Mytilene insisted on having the place restored to them, but the Athenians refused, since they argued that the Aeolians had no better claim to the Trojan territory than themselves, or than any of the other Greeks who helped Menelaus on occasion of the rape of Helen. War accordingly continued, with many and various incidents, whereof the following was one. In a battle which was gained by the Athenians, the poet Alcaeus took to flight, and saved himself, but lost his arms, which fell into the hands of the conquerors. They hung them up in the temple of Athena at Sigeum, and Alcaeus made a poem, describing his misadventure to his friend Melanippus, and sent it to him at Mytilene. The Mytileneans and Athenians were reconciled by Periander, the son of Cypselus, who was chosen by both parties as arbiter. He decided that they should each retain that of which they were at the time possessed, and Sigeum passed in this way under the dominion of Athens. On the return of Hippias to Asia from Lacedaemon, he moved heaven and earth to set Artaphernes against the Athenians, and did all that lay in his power to bring Athens into subjection to himself and Darius. So, when the Athenians learnt what he was about, they sent envoys to Sardis, and exhorted the Persians not to lend an ear to the Athenian exiles. Artaphernes told them in reply that if they wished to remain safe, they must receive back Hippias. The Athenians, when this answer was reported to them, determined not to consent, and therefore made up their minds to be at open enmity with the Persians. The Athenians had come to this decision, and were already in bad odour with the Persians, when Aristagoras, the Milesian, dismissed from Sparta by Cleomenes the Lacedaemonian, arrived at Athens. He knew that after Sparta, Athens was the most powerful of the Grecian states. Accordingly, he appeared before the people, and as he had done at Sparta, spoke to them of the good things which there were in Asia, and of the Persian mode of fight, how they used neither shield nor spear, and were very easy to conquer. All this he urged, and reminded them also that Miletus was a colony from Athens, and therefore ought to receive their succour, since they were so powerful, and in the earnestness of his entreaties he cared little what he promised, till at the last he prevailed and won them over. It seems indeed to be easier to deceive a multitude than one man, for Aristagoras, though he failed to impose on Cleomenes the Lacedaemonian, succeeded with the Athenians, who were 30,000. Won by his persuasions, they voted that 20 ships should be sent to the aid of the Ionians, under the command of Melanthius, one of the citizens, a man of mark in every way. These ships were the beginning of mischief, both to the Greeks and to the barbarians. Aristagoras sailed away in advance, and when he reached Miletus devised a plan from which no manner of advantage could possibly accrue to the Ionians. Indeed, in forming it, he didn't aim at their benefit, but his sole wish was to annoy King Darius. He sent a messenger into Phrygia to those Paeonians who had been led away captive by Megabazus from the river Strymon, and who now dwelt by themselves in Phrygia, having a tract of land and a hamlet of their own. This man, when he reached the Paeonians, spoke thus to them: Men of Paeonia, Aristagoras, king of Miletus, has sent me to you to inform you that you may now escape, if you choose to follow the advice he proffers. All Ionia has revolted from the king, and the way is open to you to return to your own land. You have only to contrive to reach the sea coast. The rest shall be our business. When the Paeonians heard this, they were exceedingly rejoiced, and taking with them their wives and children, they made all speed to the coast, a few only remaining in Phrygia through fear. The rest, having reached the sea, crossed over to Chios, where they had just landed, when a great troop of Persian horse came following upon their heels and seeking to overtake them. Not succeeding, however, they sent a message across to Chios and begged the Paeonians to come back again. These last refused, and were conveyed by the Chians from Chios to Lesbos, and by the Lesbians thence to Doriscus, from which place they made their way on foot to Paeonia. The Athenians now arrived with a fleet of 20 sail, and brought also in their company 5 triremes of the Eretrians, which had joined the expedition not so much out of goodwill towards Athens as to pay a debt which they already owed to the people of Miletus. For in the old war between the Chalcidians and Eretrians, the Milesians fought on the Eretrian side throughout, while the Chalcidians had the help of the Samian people. Aristagoras, on their arrival, assembled the rest of his allies and proceeded to attack Sardis, not however leading the army in person, but appointing to the command his own brother, Carapinas, and Hermophantus, one of the citizens, while he himself remained behind in Miletus. The Ionians sailed with this fleet to Ephesus, and leaving their ships at Caressus in the Ephesian territory, took guides from the city and went up the country with a great host. They marched along the course of the river Caista, and crossing over the ridge of Tmolus, came down upon Sardis, and took it, no man opposing them. The whole city fell into their hands, except only the citadel, which Artaphernes defended in person, having with him no contemptible force. Though, however, they took the city, they didn't succeed in plundering it. For as the houses in Sardis were most of them built of reeds, and even the few which were of brick had a reed thatching for their roof, one of them was no sooner fired by a soldier than the flames ran speedily from house to house and spread over the whole place. As the fire raged, the Lydians and such Persians as were in the city, enclosed on every side by the flames, which had seized all the skirts of the town, and finding themselves unable to get out, came in crowds into the marketplace, and gathered themselves upon the banks of the Pactolus. This stream, which comes down from Mount Tmolus and brings the Sardians a quantity of gold dust, runs directly through the marketplace of Sardis and joins the Hermus before that river reaches the sea. So the Lydians and Persians, brought together in this way in the marketplace and about the Pactolus, were forced to stand on their defence, and the Ionians, when they saw the enemy in part resisting, in part pouring towards them in dense crowds, took fright, and drawing off to the ridge which is called Tmolus, when night came, went back to their ships. Sardis, however, was burnt, and among other buildings a temple of the native goddess Cybele was destroyed, which was the reason afterwards alleged by the Persians for setting on fire the temples of the Greeks. As soon as what had happened was known, all the Persians who were stationed on this side the Halys drew together and brought help to the Lydians. Finding, however, when they arrived, that the Ionians had already withdrawn from Sardis, they set off, and following close upon their track, came up with them at Ephesus. The Ionians drew out against them in battle array, and a fight ensued, wherein the Greeks had very greatly the worse. Vast numbers were slain by the Persians. Among other men of note they killed the captain of the Eretrians, a certain Eualcidas, a man who had gained crowns at the games, and received much praise from Simonides the Chian. Such as made their escape from the battle dispersed among the several cities. So ended this encounter. Afterwards the Athenians quite forsook the Ionians, and though Aristagoras besought them much by his ambassadors, refused to give him any further help. Still the Ionians, notwithstanding this desertion, continued unceasingly their preparations to carry on the war against the Persian king, which their late conduct towards him had rendered unavoidable. Sailing into the Hellespont, they brought Byzantium and all the other cities in that quarter under their sway, and quitting the Hellespont, they went to Caria, and won the greater part of the Carians to their side, while Cornus, which had formerly refused to join with them, after the burning of Sardis, came over likewise. All the Cyprians too, excepting those of Amathus, of their own proper motion espoused the Ionian cause. The occasion of their revolting from the Medes was the following. There was a certain Onesilas, younger brother of Gorgas, king of Salamis, and son of Chersis, who was son of Siromus, and grandson of Evelthon. This man had often in former times entreated Gorgas to rebel against the king, but when he heard of the revolt of the Ionians, he left him no peace with his importunity. As, however, Gorgas wouldn't hearken to him, he watched his occasion, and when his son had gone outside the town, he with his partisans closed the gates upon him. Gorgas, thus deprived of his city, fled to the Medes, and Onesimus, being now king of Salamis, sought to bring about a revolt of the whole of Cyprus. All were prevailed on except the Amathusians, who refused to listen to him, whereupon Onesimus sat down before Amathus and laid siege to it. While Onesimus was engaged in the siege of